Listen, you're in a privileged position to learn a thing or two. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open.
Bark all day, doggy.
I'm your huckleberry.
Say when.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Raft Podcast. I'm Eljay.
AB.
And our special guest today, our very first interview, is...
I'm Rob with Comics Explained, guys. I'm talking over the hosts of the podcast, and I don't even care. No, what's going on, guys?
Just straight Thanos your way in there.
Yeah, man. Perfectly balanced.
Perfectly balanced.
Love
That's
it.
it.
Yeah.
Rob, welcome.
Yeah, man. What's going on, dude?
We're just happy to have you on, man. I can't believe that one of our very first interviews is with somebody that was on our bucket list that, you know, we thought when we first got started, maybe someday, somewhere, if we're lucky, we can get Rob on, and then you ended up being our first guest.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's the thing. I don't really make distinctions when it comes to like podcast sizes. Because I've seen podcasts that have like a huge audience, and I have no desire to work with the host at all, just because of the nature of them. And I've seen podcasts that have really small audiences, and I'm excited to work with the host, and vice versa, right? I care more about the people who run the podcast, you know. And honestly, most of the time, whenever I get a request to be on a podcast, I'll just kind of be like, I mean, do I feel like being on one? So, I mean, it just happened to be that you guys caught me in a mood when I was like, I feel like being on a podcast. And so I was like, yeah, sure, why not? You know, why not just jump onto a podcast? Because I don't look them up. Like, I don't really look up audience sizes or anything. It's just like, you know.
Yeah.
We'll see what's up. Yeah.
Well, we feel real blessed.
And like, here's the thing, I put on my pants just like everybody else. I make videos where I ramble about comics for 30 minutes and then play video games for the rest of the day. Like, I don't.
They're so good.
I appreciate it, man.
Okay, so just really quick, what was Rob like as a kid?
Oh, bro. Rob as a kid was ADHD, usually getting in trouble in school because I couldn't sit still. Yeah. No, Rob was a little kid. Because I assume you're asking this question in relation to comics, man. Because that's usually one of the questions that I always get. You know, how did I get into comics? It's always X-Men the Animated Series, right? Like it's X-Men the Animated Series was the show that got me into comics because I loved it. You know, it was. I remember being a little kid, and my dad and I would watch that on Saturday mornings. And I want to say it came on at like 11:30 a.m. where we were at, but we would watch it every morning. You know, on Saturday. And I'd have my bowl of cereal, and my dad would be eating whatever he's eating, and we'd watch the show together. Because for my dad, it was reliving his childhood, right? You know, like in the same way that we go and we sit down and we watch, you know, the Iron Man movie or the Avengers films or the Black Widow movie, I guess. We sit down and watch these different movies. That movie could have been so much better than it was. Nonetheless, you know, we watch these movies and we watch these TV shows, and it brings us back to when we were little kids. You know, and as comic book fans yourselves, I imagine a time will come when like you'll want to share that with your own kids. And so that's how it was with me and my dad. You know, that for him it was, I mean, he was more of a DC guy than a Marvel guy, but he read Marvel. And so it was kind of going back to his childhood and reliving all those moments. And for me, it was brand new. I was like, this is so cool, you know, Phoenix and Cyclops and the X-Men and everything. And I had no idea and didn't really even understand what I was watching, but I just knew that I liked it and I knew I wanted to learn more about it. And so, try as he might, my dad tried to get me into comics by buying me a Batman comic and the first issue of Sovereign 7, which was terrible. So when Chris Claremont left Marvel, he goes over to DC. He writes the Sovereign 7, which was a garbage comic book. They tried to make it interesting by putting Supergirl on it, or was it Supergirl or Power Girl? I think it was Power Girl. Nobody cared. They canceled it anyway. It was a really, really bad story. I didn't care anything about Batman. I mean, he was interesting insofar as like any comic book superhero is interesting to me, but I cared more about Marvel. Like I wanted to learn about the X-Men and the comics, and, you know, because of the fact that the 1990s was just the decade of X-Men crossover events, and some were good, some were bad, but like they crossed over with everything. that got me into the Avengers and Black Panther and X-Force and X Factor and like all these different comics, right? You know, and Spider-Man and whatnot. But at the end of the day, X-Men was always it's the comic that I've read the longest, and it's the one that I always go back to, right? So yeah, Rob as a little kid, I was a crazy ADHD, attention deficit, hyperactive comic book fan who loved the X-Men.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you and I were both born in 1984, and you were talking about X-Men, the animated series, which of course I grew up on. I grew up on, you know, X-Men, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Pogs. Did you have any of the collectible stuff early on? Like there was the game for Sega, the X-Men games. I had it on the Game Gear, the action figures. I remember comic cards, like people have baseball cards, and I had books and sleeves of them, and I still have them to this day. And I was gonna pass them on to my son, but I don't feel like he's responsible enough to actually take care of
No,
them. You know
I would
mean?
not give those to your son until he's like a teenager. You know, maybe when he's closer to going to college, be a good time to give them to him. Well, you give those to a little kid, man. You're gonna find him in pieces all over the house.
Yeah, I mean he's 11, so he's already trying to take care of his like Pokemon cards and stuff like that, which I know nothing about. But what did you have that you fondly remember that you can think back and remember on?
Honestly, it was the comics for the most part. I remember I tried to get some of the video games. Like I had to convince my mom to get me Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. Because of the fact that like she thought she was one of those moms, like you remember this back in the day, moms were always like, you know, it's too violent, right? And so like the toy industry's counter to that was like, don't call it violence, call it action, you know, like that kind of thing. But yeah, you know, she wouldn't let me take karate classes or anything like that. So playing like X-Men video games that were hyper violent, you know, she wasn't necessarily on board with. How it is I ever managed to get away with reading comics like Age of Apocalypse, and like the Onslaught saga, and like the Maximum Carnage story itself, where he's writing his name in blood on the walls. You know, how in the world she saw a difference there, I don't entirely know. There were a few comic book games that I had here and there, but by and large, I didn't really do the whole trading card thing. My thing at the time was actually Pogs. That was my obsession. Yeah, the whole Pogs craze of the 1990s. But I was never really the trading card. Having said that, I'm aware of it. And I knew enough back then to know that like with the trading cards, they would like power scale, right? So like they would give you like the stats and everything on the characters. So it would be like, this character's more powerful than that character because the trading card says so, you know, and like it's the only real guide, you know, that you had back then. But yeah, no, I remember a friend of mine, Ace, had that was actually one of the things that kind of expanded my interest in stuff outside of the X-Men. I remember there was one time we lived in an apartment complex called Waterford in Kent, Washington back in the day. I remember I was playing in the backyard, or what passes for a backyard in an apartment complex. I was hanging out there on the back patio with Ace, and I remember he had Captain America and he had Nimrod. And I remember he was telling me about how like Silver Surfer's girlfriend died. And it was like all these things that he was telling me. And I didn't, you know, in hindsight, like he got most of it wrong. But, you know, it was a little kid trying to understand comics, but it all fascinated me so much. And so that's one of the things that led me into reading the X-Men outside of or reading Marvel Comics outside of just the X-Men. Like, you know, it was almost like I was fascinated with the idea of Captain America. Like, who is this guy? Like, what's the deal with guys running around with a shield and everything? Like, is he really powerful? You know, it was different things like that. So yeah, it was either playing with like my friends' toys because mom wouldn't let me buy any of them, or it was reading my comics and playing what few comic book video games I could have. Nowadays, of course, you know, I'm actually playing through Gotham Knights right now with my girl Mariah, and it's fun. I can definitely see where like it kind of lacks in the same way. It's not really the same as like Arkham Asylum. But, you know, having played like Ultimate Alliance, you know, and like X-Men Legends and all that kind of stuff, like, yeah, like I play those games now every chance that I get. But no, back then I didn't really have the trading cards or any collector's items per se.
So you don't only run Comics Explained, which is what you're very well known for. You run Geek Culture Explained, and you were also part of a weekly podcast. I think it was weekly.
Yeah, the weekly
poll.
Yeah.
One of the craziest things that I found in all of the stuff that I've watched of yours, though, was an in-person interview with Tom Hardy and Riz Ahmed. Amazing actors. How were your nerves going into that? What was that experience like?
Bro, There's never been an instance where I've done a press junket and I wasn't ridiculously nervous. It's kind of a funny thing because, okay, so are you guys familiar with how press junkets work?
Not at all.
No.
Okay, so I'm probably getting myself blacklisted here. I'm probably going to get blacklisted and they're going to be like, never bring him back to a press junket, which admittedly is okay. Like, I can say that I've done it a few times and it was fun. So the way press junkets work is they usually get an email from a contact at whatever the company happens to be. And it's, of course, part of their social media team. They give you the option to accept it or decline it. And of course, I accepted it. And so they fly you out there. They give you a place to stay. And so you get to where the actual meeting is going to be, like where they have the celebrities and everything walking through. Or where you're going to be talking with them. And I remember getting into what was called the green room, where basically everybody just kind of waits for their turn to be called to go and interview the celebrity. And there's people in there from like comic book resources and like BuzzFeed and IMDb and Yahoo and everything, depending on the popularity of the film, right? You know, it's there's all kinds of people showing up there. And so I'm looking around and I'm like, God, there are people out here who have been doing this twice as long as I have, right? There are people here who are older than I am who are doing this, and there's companies that have been around since the 90s, right? And even before that are like sending people here, right? You got like CNN reps, you know, and it's just it's crazy. So like I'm surrounded by like just this big name talent. And the first time I did it, I felt so small because I'm like, I'm a guy who talks about comics on YouTube. Like, why are they asking me to come here and do this? But honestly, you know, talking to people, getting to know people, it was really, really cool. It was really, really fun. And so that lack of confidence, of course, went away. And then they hit me up. They're like, you know, Robert Jefferson, you know, and they're like, you're going to be interviewing Tom Holland and Riz Ahmed together. And I'm pretty sure they were the only ones that I interviewed during the initial Venom press junket. And I get in there and I don't remember anything. Right, I get in there and they're like, you have like 3 or 4 minutes and that's it. And they'll give you a signal, they'll tell you when to stop, all that kind of stuff. And so like they give you this signal to like wrap it up and so on. They're like, once your time's up, if the celebrities keep talking, you're fine. But like if you start to ask a question, they'll make you leave. They'll be like, no, your time's up, you need to go. And they don't mess around because they're usually on a very, very tight schedule. Like it's back to back to back. They're as efficient as they can be given like the nature of celebrities, right? So they call me in there, I sit down, and I am so incredibly nervous. My contact named Derek, I hope I don't get in trouble with by telling all this, but Derek, the guy who invited me out there, he was awesome. Like he stayed with me the whole time because he could tell how nervous I was. But I loved the whole experience. I was just like super nervous. And so I'm in there in this interview, right? And I'm like, what's going on, guys? And I tell him, you know, I'm Comics Explained, and like Tom Hardy knows who I am, and I'm just like, wow, this is kind of crazy, right? Like Tom Hardy is aware of who I am. Vin Diesel was actually the guy who's the fan, which was crazy. Like Vin Diesel was a fan of my videos, which blew me away when I heard that. Like that was nuts. Wow. But I'm sitting in this room. And I'm asking him questions, right? Because like I boiled it down to like 2 or 3 questions beforehand, and we're on some topic. We're talking about like his like the favorite scenes that Tom Hardy went to shoot. He's like, well, they cut something like 30 to 45 minutes of my favorite scenes from the movie, and I didn't even catch the significance of that. I'm so focused on asking the question, I'm not even paying attention to the answers that they're giving. And so almost as quick as it started, it was done, and I was just like, my brain wasn't able to process what had happened, right? They give me my SD card so I can go back and put everything together. And, you know, I thank Derek and, you know, maybe hang out with him for a little bit and talk to some of the folks over at Sony. And then I'm on my way back home, right? Get the whole thing together, get it uploaded, you know, get it out on the channel. Super excited about it. Fans are going to love it. The next morning, a friend of mine, Ryan, hits me up, right? One of my guys at the staff, on my staff at the time. And he was like, dude, have you seen the news? And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, everybody picked up your story. And I was like, what? Well, he's like, everybody's talking about your interview. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, BuzzFeed, the whole 9 yards. And I was like, so I start Googling, and they're all picking up that segment where Tom Hardy was like 30 to 45 minutes of my favorite scenes from the movie were cut. And they're all like referencing my interview, and they're showing my interview and all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, all right, I've made it. Right. Like I'm big time now, you know, and it wasn't necessarily that I was full of myself, but I think it was the first time on my YouTube channel that I actually felt like I was on the same level as these multinational news outlets, right? These news outlets that have been broadcasting all different forms of news for decades, right? Because, here I am having my story reported on by MSNBC and Fox News and like CNN, right? I mean, these folks cover world events, and they're literally talking about my interview with Tom Hardy. So it was a really exciting moment, and it was so cool to be a part of all that. I absolutely loved it, but it was nerve-wracking as hell. It's gotten less nerve-wracking as time goes on, but I feel like in order for me to truly lose that feeling, I'd probably have to move to LA and then do press junkets like all the time, which admittedly, I don't really have a desire to. I enjoy doing press junkets. Like I may very well get invited to the one for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Sony are the ones who reach out to me. It's really more, I guess Marvel and them haven't necessarily reached out, but I'm not overly against it either. I kind of figure, if they're interested in having me do a press junket, they'll reach out, and if they're not, they're not, and whatever. Like my only real concern is I just want to make sure that the movies that I'm seeing are movies that I enjoy, right? And they keep on cranking out awesome stuff. No, it's never not been nerve-wracking, and yeah, I've enjoyed it every step of the way. So yeah, it's cool.
Well, Derek and Sony, if you guys are listening, please don't blacklist Rob.
Yeah, please don't.
Yeah, one of our 40 views will be some random dude from Sony.
Dude, you never know. Like that's one of the things that I've learned here. One of the things that I've learned is you never know. Like people always kind of adopt this mentality. They're like, those companies will never have heard of us until like we reach a certain size. But that's not really true, because you'd be amazed at different podcasts that people listen to. So yeah, I would not be so dismissive, man.
The coolest moment, you talk about, knowing that you made it on, when you end up on CNN. But I think any fan of yours that watches that video, the one thing that really sticks out outside of the actual interview was right before Tom Hardy was about to take off. He looked at you and said, "You never explained the comics." And it was, as a fan of yours and a fan of his, there's a moment as a fan of both where you say, "Oh yeah, Tom Hardy knows who Rob is. That's for sure."
Yeah, it was wild. I was talking to him about Venom and about a Venom comic that I needed to record. But yeah, it was cool. It was wild. Yeah. Yeah, it was nuts.
What do you got for him, KB?
So Eljay and I mainly play this game called Marvel's Contest of Champions.
Ooh, that's a fun game.
Yeah, you've heard about it?
Yeah, I played it when it first came out. I haven't played it in a long time, but I am aware that it has a really dedicated fan following.
Okay. So we recently they introduced certain characters where they let the player base vote on who they think, they like you get 8 characters and then it's an elimination like tournament style. So they recently boiled down to 2 characters that they're going to add to the game. One being Gladiator and one being White Tiger.
No way. So, they're total opposites. Like one sucks and the other doesn't. Like that's interesting.
That's why I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask you, if you had to vote, would you pick White Tiger or Gladiator to bring
Gladiator?
To the video game?
Gladiator, hands down. Just because I love overpowered characters. I love broken characters. Yeah, so definitely Gladiator.
Yeah, Gladiator gang.
Yeah, I voted for Gladiator in every single round.
Yeah, White Tiger's cool. Don't get me wrong. Like White Tiger and Al Ewing's Mighty Avengers is cool, but no, Gladiator. I mean, it's a whole different level when you're talking about him.
So our options this year were Deathlock, Gladiator, White Tiger, Bullseye, Echo, Marrow, and who am I? Sunfire.
Marrow. God, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time.
Marrow's actually who I voted for in the beginning.
Did you really?
Yeah, we have this guy that he always does like fan write-ups and like what he thinks this character's skill set might be, and the way he wrote it up, he had sold me. I was like, bro, I'm voting Marrow, no problem. She got wrecked in the first round, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, I think Marrow was part of like the Generation X team back in the 90s. I'm not going to swear to that, but no, she was big back in the 90s. I'm pretty sure. I mean, she's okay, but like I said, I love ridiculously OP characters. Having said that, Bullseye's pretty solid. I want to say it was during the Shadowlands storyline, Bullseye held his own. He fought off the entirety of the Hand, right? That mystical ninja organization that exists out there. He's ridiculously, like he's a really, really underrated character. Like almost any depiction of Bullseye, at least in this day and age, he's almost kind of like a punching bag. for Marvel, where it's just like, oh yeah, here comes Bullseye, you know. But truth to tell, like under the Frank Miller years, and whenever he's written right, Bullseye. I mean, there's a lot of characters like that in Marvel. Like a really good example of this is the Purple Man, right? Like you could like the Marvel Cinematic Universe could make a movie where the Avengers come together to fight Purple Man, and it would be believable because Zebediah Killgrave, with the exception of precious few people like the Incredible Hulk, probably. Definitely Wolverine, because I'm sure he can resist it. Spider-Girl, Jessica Drew, she can resist it. And like telepaths. The Purple Man could actually kill the world using the Avengers. Right? Just because the pheromones that he releases, unless a person has an incredible level of resolve and willpower, or their mind's been fortified against his efforts, like was it Jessica Jones was like the introduction of Purple Man, and like she was manipulated by him. And so God, like Eljay looks like he has Jesus in the corner of his room. He's got like light shining down, and it's like
I don't know what's going on.
it's just light shining onto your camera. You're good, man. But yeah, no, like Jessica Jones' mind was fortified against the powers of the Purple Man by Jean Grey of the X-Men, right? And so unless you're talking about a situation like that, Killgrave could kill a lot of people in the Marvel universe using his powers on a limited scale. Killgrave killing like Galactus is ridiculous, right? Like that's nonsensical, right? But nonetheless, like he could go to war against the Marvel universe, and there would be a believable movie where it takes the entirety of the Avengers to unify in order to defeat him, right? He's on that level, and it's just a guy who can control the mind of people, or more or less dominate them by emitting pheromones. So there's a lot of characters out there in Marvel that are just really underrated because for one reason or another, they're not written well, or they're not given a whole lot of page space in the comics. And so you don't really see them written at their best. But Bullseye is a good example of that. I'm glad that he was a character to vote on. How did he do in Contest of Champions? Like where did he come in at?
He did pretty good. He's also been in the lineup for the last couple of years. We've had a couple opportunities to vote on him, and he like always makes it to the final four-ish. And then somehow he loses out. So, in my opinion, he's probably going to be released regardless. They'll give up the vote, and they're just going to put him in the game.
Yeah, I mean, at that level, he's just popular.
We've had Elektra and Kingpin in the game, all of them, and there's two different Daredevils. There's the regular comic Daredevil, the OG one, and then there's the Netflix Hell's Kitchen Daredevil.
Hell's Angel?
Yeah,
he's like a biker
Daredevil.
I mean, I'll be honest, man. I would read a comic about Daredevil who joins like Hell's Angels. He becomes like a biker, right? Yeah. And just like rides around the country, just like beating people up and breaking up bars and stuff. Like I would absolutely. That's honestly, man, that sounds like an amazing comic, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
It seems kind of like, in the Old Man Logan story, how Hawkeye's blind and he's just like ripping through the desert.
Yeah.
Driving them around. I imagine that's like Daredevil blind would driving a motorcycle would be similar.
It would be. It'd be amazing because he would just look cool.
Yeah.
Like biker Daredevil, he would just look amazing.
So one thing that you and I have in common is that we both have a pretty solid disdain for Black Bolt.
Yes, he sucks. Yeah, Black Bolt sucks.
Blackagar Boltagon, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, he's never not sucked.
That was such a phone-it-in name when they were coming up with his... we got a character named Black Bolt. What are we going to name him? Blackagar Boltagon. Yeah. You know, somebody who was drinking a tall can on the way to work that day. Is there a whacker mainstream character in Marvel that you think has always been overhyped?
God, an overhyped character in Marvel Comics. Man. I mean, I don't know if Black Bolt's overhyped. I think the Black Bolt fan base overhypes him because he's never like there's been like 2 or 3 times in Marvel when Black Bolt hasn't been trash. Right, like, and that's basically it, right? I mean, you have, and one of those times isn't even because he's doing anything cool, it's because he just gets demolished in such a spectacular way. Like, when Thanos just crushes him during Infinity, it's just like, your time to shine, Black Bolt, was when you were getting wrecked. Like, that's how much you suck, because the best part about this story was watching just how spectacularly you got your ass handed to you. Like, that's what made you cool, you know? Like, imagine that. Imagine being a person people hate so much that they love how badly you were thrashed, right? I mean, it's just, it's just like, wow, that's a whole new level of suckery right there. But I will say Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee, in all seriousness, Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee's Inhumans Volume 2, that was a cool story. Mostly because of the fact that Black Bolt was just being really like duplicitous and like manipulative and that kind of stuff. So it was because of the fact that he was willing to do some pretty shady stuff. And then War of Kings, that was a really cool story when he went to war against Vulcan. But in terms of being overhyped, see, I don't know, because in recent years, a lot of the characters that we've seen have been kind of like, they've been writing them in pretty solid ways. Like, for example, Moon Knight, if you had asked me this question 3 years ago, I would say, oh, Moon Knight's definitely overhyped. He's Marvel's Batman, right? It's just Moon Knight fans just refuse to admit that. And it's like, well, I mean, let's count the ways, Moon Knight fans. Like, Batman's got batarangs. Moon Knight has moonarangs. Batman dresses up in the middle of the night and beats up people. Moon Knight dresses up in the middle of the night and beats up people. Bruce Wayne is Batman's super rich alter ego. Steve Grant is Moon Knight super, like, you got Matches Malone for Batman and you got Jake Lockley for Moon Knight, right? I mean, it's just, at that point, refusing to admit that Moon Knight is Batman is just being just good old fashioned denial is all that is. But Moon Knight, as he's being written right now by Christopher Cantwell, maybe Jed McKay, it's really, really good, right? He's really awesome the way his story is being handled. Ghost Rider Johnny Blaze just came back to the Marvel Universe, so he's really cool. Like, I love the way his story is being handled. God, the Thor comics are really good right now. I can't really think of one off the top of my head, to be honest with you. I'm sure somebody listening to this podcast is driving on their way to work and they're just like screaming a name into their car, just like, it's Professor X. I have no idea, but yeah, I don't know. The things that I'm not necessarily liking about Marvel at the moment have less to do with the characters and more to do with the stories they're writing about the characters. So the characters are being handled really, really well. It's just the stories of characters that are involved in are just like Jason Aaron's Avengers run right now is just kind of like, I mean, it leaves a bit to be desired. It's like I'm not really compelled. I'm not really driven to read his stories. But now, when you ask this question, are you talking about in relation to Marvel or in relation to like comics in general?
Well, yeah, it was specifically Marvel, but I guess, that question could span all of comics.
Oh, Batman. Batman is hands down overhyped. Oh, he's ridiculously overhyped. I mean, there was a story in what is it? It was Scott Snyder's Batman Endgame. When Batman has to fight the Justice League, who have been Jokerized by the Joker, right? They're like foaming at the mouth and like laughing and giggling and carrying on. Batman takes out a piece of kryptonite gum and spits it in Superman's eye. It's the most plot device thing ever, right? Like it's just like, well, here's Scott Snyder writing the Batman story. He's like, well, Batman's got to have some way to win, so he spit kryptonite gum in his eye because why the hell not? And then like that's it. Like it's just like this is ridiculous. Like it's preposterous. But yeah, Batman is ridiculously overhyped. He's interesting, but if we're talking about a practical story involving Bruce Wayne, like if I said, okay, I'm going to write a Batman story and it's going to take place here in the real world, somebody would have shot him in the face years ago, right? Like Two-Face and then would have been like, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to nuke Wayne Manor.
Yeah,
like we're just gonna blow it to pieces, or like what is it? Mr. Sunday Movies had this amazing video where he was like all the ways that Superman can kill Batman, and like he listed all these ways, and then like at the same time was like, or simply kick him in the head, like just kick his head off, or or like throw him into the sun, or fly him out to like Neptune and drop him off there. Right, or like leave him in the center of a star, or like a gas giant. Like there's a million ways that Superman can kill Batman. So Batman is ridiculously overhyped, and that's why I say that at the end of the day, it all comes down to how the story's being written. Like a really good example, when Christopher Priest was writing Deathstroke as part of DC Rebirth, there's this amazing moment in the story when Deathstroke is caught up to by Superman. And it's like, dude, Deathstroke's gonna fight Superman, and so like Deathstroke throws green kryptonite at Superman. Right, in order to get away, Superman catches it and realizes it's just glowing green rocks. They're rocks that Deathstroke spray painted to look like green kryptonite, but it was enough of a distraction that he could get away from Superman, and like that was it. And it's just like that's genius, right? That's just absolutely genius. Whereas if this was a Batman comic, it would be like, well, here comes Batman reaching into his utility belt and pulling out a toothpick that somehow is now being metamorphed into a cannon the size of an aircraft carrier that fires a gigantic kryptonite bullet at Superman, blows a hole in him, and then he's dead. Because Batman comics. Like it's nuts. It's kind of ridiculous. So
That's
yeah.
Batman.
Yeah, Batman's definitely overhyped.
I did kind of speaking on that, like the writers and the story. I did have a buddy of mine on Twitter, Null Space. He wanted to know what your thoughts are about the reboot in comics nowadays, and he said more specifically like the constant crisis in Marvel Universe, like retcons and reboots. And do you think that trend will continue?
The truth to tell, man, I don't know. At the moment, I do understand why they're doing it. Because it's okay. So one of the things that people kind of have to contend with, and it's been a thing since the original Crisis on Infinite Earths, modern day DC readers, that is to say, a person who started reading DC comics with like Rebirth or something like that, this is all new to them. And while I was too young to read Crisis on Infinite Earths, and honestly didn't read it until a few decades after it initially happened, one of the things that happened there is exactly what you're seeing here. That you had Crisis on Infinite Earths. It was a story that was written. But because DC editorial, they were not all on the same page, you had characters like Power Girl, who existed in the new, like in New Universe, right? Because the idea behind Crisis on Infinite Earths was to wipe away the multiverse. And then to come back and give us New Earth and then tell new origin stories for characters. But the problem that you had is that it wasn't done immediately for everybody. It was staged out over time. And so for a time in DC Comics, you had Power Girl, who originated from Earth 2 in alternate reality, who was flying around in New Earth operating as a superhero. But because of Crisis on Infinite Earths, technically, she came from a universe that didn't exist anymore. And arguably had never existed. And so because of that, the question that you find yourself asking is, how do they justify her existence? Why is she referencing a universe that doesn't exist anymore? And according to Crisis on Infinite Earths, has never existed, right? Because literally they did Crisis and then they rebooted, right? It was like, this is everybody's first appearance ever in the history of comic books. Batman got, year one by Frank Miller, which was phenomenal, but it told the whole new origin story of Bruce Wayne going forward, acting as though he never existed before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And so what you saw in the aftermath of that is you saw cleanup duty. Right? In the 90s, you got 0 Hour Crisis in Time. In the 2000s, you got Infinite Crisis and then Final Crisis. But those events were designed to just clean up the continuity errors that had been made by Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then to clean up the new continuity errors that had been made by the continuity errors that they were just trying to clean up. And so it was one of those things where DC's never had a tried and true, full-on, line-wide, complete wipe reboot. Right, that's never really happened. The closest you ever got to that was the New 52. And the only two holdouts with that were Green Lantern and Batman. And the only reason for that is because Batman was just such a popular character and he had so many seminal story arcs, they had to keep them there. They couldn't wipe the events of A Death in the Family or Killing Joke or Nightfall. They couldn't just wipe those from existence and say they never happened because they were so integral to Batman's history. Even events like Final Crisis, right? And Batman being quote unquote killed by Darkseid, but actually being time displaced because Batman's too popular to kill off. Things like that had to stay. And so, DC's response during the New 52 was like, well, we're just going to cram all this into a 5-year window, which was ridiculous to fans. Like, so you're telling me in the span of 5 years, that Batman has had all these Robins, and Jason Todd died, Batgirl got shot, and his back was broken by Bane. Like, it's really been an adventurous 5 years for Bruce Wayne. Like, a lot's happened in the span of 5 years. Like, literally his whole life has happened in 5 years. And so fans ultimately rejected it, and then, of course, that was one of the things that DC fixed during Rebirth. With the Green Lantern, everything had been insanely popular since the days of Jeff Johns and Green Lantern Rebirth, so they didn't New 52 him. Right, they didn't reboot him. They were like, here's Green Lantern Secret Origin by Jeff Johns, which kind of does a new thing for him. But by and large, they were like, everything's still intact since 2006, and there is no reboot for his character. So, I think that what a lot of people are seeing now when it comes to everything that happened with the New 52, going into DC Rebirth, going into Death Metal with Dark Knight's Death Metal by Scott Snyder, and going into like Perpetua and all the Batman Who Laughs stuff and all that kind of stuff. I think that people are right to feel burned out because the last time DC did something like this, it took place between 1987 and like 2009. Right, so you're talking about a very, very wide gap in terms of what is it? Let's see, 1987, 2009. You're talking about what, like 30 years? Yeah, 32 years. So it took them 32 years to clean up continuity errors and then eventually going into a reboot with the New 52. They're taking what they did over the course of 32 years and they're cramming it into less than 10. And so I certainly see that a lot of, I can tell a lot of people are kind of looking around and they're like, okay, I'm so sick of this. And it makes sense, right? Because DC New 52 is everything. People are just like, but what about like red-haired Wally West? And where does the Authority fit into all of this? And all this Wildstorm stuff. And like Grifter's here, but nobody cares. And it's like all these things, like how do you reconcile all of that? And so DC's like, okay, fine, here's Rebirth, right? Where we're going to take all the stuff you loved, we're going to bring it all back, we're going to merge it with the stuff that you have now. But then that creates a whole new level of continuity issues. Because I think DC realized the success that came with the New 52 initially, and then the success that came with DC Rebirth. And then it's like, well, let's make another event that focuses on these two things and kind of clears things up a little bit. And then I think that because of how things were handled, I don't really know the behind the scenes stuff. I'll find out eventually, but because of how things were handled with Scott Snyder and Perpetua and all that kind of stuff, DC wanted to basically undo the stuff that he did with Death Metal and Perpetua and everything, and then kind of reboot-esque, so to speak. And so that's why what's happening right now is just an unofficial reboot, is really all it is. Like they're more or less New 52ing DC all over again, but in an unofficial way. But again, I understand. I think that they're right to look at DC Comics right now and to feel that it's just this chaotic mess, because it feels chaotic, right? It feels wild and it feels like it's all over the place, and they're just rebooting for the sake of rebooting. To answer that question, do I think that this will be, what do I think the future of this will be? Honestly, it all comes down to sales. I think that DC abusing the concept of reboots the way they've been doing can work against them, because if people look at the DC landscape and they say, well, there's going to be a reboot in another 5 years, then what you're going to see is DC do a reboot, you're going to see a massive spike in sales, and then you're going to see a collapse. Because nobody's going to become invested in characters or read characters for the long term if they know the whole history is going to be rebooted again, that none of it's going to make a difference. And so I think it could work against them in that way if they do it every 2, 3, 4 years. I think that having a crisis that kind of cleans up continuity a little bit is necessary, right? I mean, you don't just let your house have a mess that just builds up and it just keeps building and building and building and building. That's how you become a hoarder, right? Like once a week, you go through and you clean your home. And I think that having some housekeeping, a crisis event that's akin to housekeeping, I think that's a good idea. But that's something that could be done every 10 to 20 years, because it usually takes about that long to start creating continuity issues. I think that right now, and I think it's necessary. Because I think we were talking about the days of like Carmine Infantino and Julius Schwartz and Wally Wood, where you're way back in like the 1950s and 60s, and you've got what amounts to a handful of characters basically, right? Or even go back to like the 1940s, really, if you want to talk about a roster that small. It's very easy to keep continuity intact, right? But much like Marvel in the 1960s and 1970s, they and DC have realized very, very fast, the bigger your landscape gets, the more difficult it is to keep it clean and organized. And in order to tell compelling stories, you have to let writers take their leave of a character, right? You have to let them write stories they like and then leave, right? To kind of walk away. And somebody else has to come in and then tell their own story with that character. It's what keeps the characters interesting and refreshing. But when you have 3 or 4 writers handling a character over the span of anywhere between 8 to 15 years, you're going to have continuity issues. You're going to have stories that are written that conflict with a previous story, or things that simply just don't make sense. And so you're going to have, and not only is it just that one character, now you're talking about the entire lineup, right? And then you're talking about Justice League. Like a really good example is you after New 52, you had DCEU. So you have a story where in the Justice League comics, Batman, like Bruce Wayne is still Batman. In the Batman comics, it's Commissioner Gordon. And so people are just like, well, how do you reconcile these things? How do you reconcile Commissioner Gordon being Batman and Bruce Wayne being Batman? And DC's like, well, you can just kind of pick and choose the stories that you want. And people didn't like that. People want continuity. But with continuity also comes an inevitable mess. So to answer their question, I think the future of DC will continue to be the idea of I would call them continuity corrections. Crises, if you want to call them that. But I think the kind of almost back-to-back reboots or soft reboots of what you're seeing with the New 52 going into DC Rebirth, going into whatever the name of this thing is called that Joshua Williamson is handling, which as good as it is more or less a reboot. I'm hoping that will not be an ongoing thing, because that risks burning people out and it risks driving readers away.
On the same sort of note, as far as, just taking artistic liberties, retconning things, there's been some interesting choices in the MCU. There's been some talk recently. I don't know if you follow Everything Always, Michael Roman on YouTube. Interesting channel, but
He's really, really good at what he does.
he's very
Yeah,
good.
I like
Yeah,
him.
and
Yeah.
and he does have. He'll tell you when when the information is maybe a little shaky. But recently he did bring up some pretty serious talk from what he says industry insiders that Doctor Doom may come after Secret Wars in the MCU. How do you feel about that storyline revolving around possibly just Kang as opposed to God Emperor Doom? Because I'm a huge Doctor Doom fan. Doctor Doom is one of my favorite characters that's ever been created.
Oh, me
And
too.
God Emperor Doom was one of the coolest versions of Doctor Doom.
Yes.
The idea
Yes.
to me of him not being a part of Secret Wars in the MCU instantly makes me hot. Like, how are you going to reconcile that, guys?
Uh, truth to tell, I'm not even upset about it because ever since they announced Avengers Kang Dynasty and Avengers Secret Wars, and even before that, once we got to the end of Loki, they were, okay, so we get to the end of Loki. Kevin Feige and them come out and they're like, we're going to make some more Avengers movies, right? And they announced Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars at San Diego Comic-Con in July of 2022, which I was at. And I was like, that's going to be Avengers Forever. It's the first thing I thought. Like as soon as I saw them announce that, I was like, this is going to be Avengers Forever. It's going to be a combination of the original Avengers Forever team and the Ultron Forever storyline that was written. And that's going to be it. Like it's Secret Wars in name only. Because one of the things that I think people tend to forget is, yes, the story of Secret Wars is synonymous with Doctor Doom trying to steal the power and successfully stealing the power of the Beyonder in the original story. The second one is more the Beyonder just becoming John Travolta and exploring Earth. And of course, you have like the third one and the one that we actually just covered on the channel, which is the unofficial Secret Wars 3, or kind of the Secret Wars conclusion. And then of course you have the big one, the more recent one, Secret Wars 2015, which the Secret Wars story focuses on Doctor Doom. Avengers and New Avengers is a Black Panther story, right? And I don't care what anybody, no one's ever going to convince me otherwise. Like it's a Black Panther story, and probably the greatest Black Panther story ever written, to be honest with you. Just because those stories have the name Secret Wars does not mean that Secret Wars is synonymous to those stories, because there was a story that was written called Nick Fury's Secret War, where Nick Fury literally went to, like, he grabbed like a secret Avengers team, Wolverine and like a handful of others, and went on this mission that nobody was supposed to know about, and ended up coming back to biting him in the ass. But when they initially said that we're getting Avengers Secret Wars, and they coupled that with Kang Dynasty and then looking at Loki, that's when I was like, okay, so this is Secret Wars insofar as it's a war out there in the multiverse that people just don't know is happening. That like the greater landscape doesn't know it's happening. Maybe it will involve the Beyonder, and the rumor is that the Beyonder is going to be like a variant of Kang. I don't know if that's the case or not. No, I'm not upset at that, because I didn't, as soon as, given the circumstance and everything they've been building to, there may be some kind of Battle World-esque situation going on there or something along those lines. I took it as Avengers Forever, that Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars is basically going to be a coming together of different superheroes from across the multiverse. Because my thought has been, ever since Fox got the rights, or Disney got the rights to Fox and all the different characters, basically everything but Fox News, and they have the Fantastic Four now, and they have the X-Men and all the associated properties that go with them. And then they say, okay, here's the multiverse in Loki. The multiverse is back now. And in Doctor Strange 2, they explore it. And Spider-Man Far From Home gives us basically people from across the multiverse who show up in the universe. My thought was, okay, so they're easing us into the multiverse. They're easing us into different depictions of different characters from across the multiverse. If they had said, okay, guys, we own the rights to Fox, or we own all the Fox stuff now. We have the X-Men and the Fantastic Four back. And here's a movie where the X-Men and Fantastic Four just drop out of the sky, and now they're here. People would be like, this is ridiculous. Like they'd be like, this, you got to tell a story about this. And likewise, if the first outing, if they had literally gone from Loki, and in the Loki TV show, he's running around the multiverse, and he was like, come on, X-Men and Fantastic Four, let's go back to my universe. And like they show up in the main MCU, it would be like, people wouldn't be able to grasp it, right? If Doctor Strange 2 had come out before the events of Loki, people probably would have struggled with it, because it would have been like, I mean, there's a lot to cover here. There's a lot to have happen. And so I think that what they've been doing is basically easing us into the idea of the multiverse, and not us as comic book readers. We've been reading about this stuff for years, right? We know it like the back of our hand. But the hockey mom who thinks that Superman is a Marvel property, right? Who doesn't know that Superman belongs to DC, or the soccer mom who thinks that, the hockey dad who didn't know that Iron Man was not a robot, right? Like those people out there who don't know really anything about comics, and the movies are their entrance into this. You can't drop them in like that. And I think that oftentimes for us as fans, we have a hard time recognizing that line of delineation, right? We have a hard time being able to look at comic books through the eyes of people who don't read them, because we've just been reading them for so incredibly long. Hold on, let me set my laptop to do not disturb. I got friends texting me. But we've been reading comics for so long that for us, it's just business as usual. But for somebody who's never seen this kind of stuff before, it's overly confusing. And so, the fact that they're easing us into all this stuff and just looking at how it's all pressing. Loki gives us the multiverse, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange 2, they explore it. Kang is going to be a villain in it. It's obviously building up to the fact that it's less about the world, and it's more about a massive conflict taking place across the multiverse. And so in my mind, once you get to the end of Avengers Kang Dynasty and Avengers Secret Wars, they're going to quite literally New 52 the multiverse, right? They're just going to wipe the multiverse clean. And there's only going to be one continuity going forward, one universe. And that'll basically be it. I think this whole thing that Marvel's doing is just a gigantic story arc in order to explain how they bring in the X-Men to the MCU. Maybe they're not. And maybe the multiverse will continue to be a thing going forward. It does grant a litany of stories that they can tell. But I think that this is all being done for the purpose of just bringing in the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. So I'm not at all upset. To kind of get back to your point, I'm not at all upset about the fact that the stories don't really seem to revolve around Doctor Doom, and that Doctor Doom is not supposed to come after until Secret Wars. But I also think it's the smart move, because if they say, okay, guys, like here's Avengers Secret Wars and here's Battleworld, and we get the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and Doctor Doom and every character that we ever wanted to see in the MCU, then at that point, Avengers Secret Wars, it gives you the same feeling that Avengers Endgame did, which is we're done now, right? I mean, I think that's the thing that worked against the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you guys probably felt it too. You get to the end of Avengers Endgame, and you're like, okay, so like if Marvel stopped making movies right now, it would feel right? It wouldn't feel like they did things prematurely. It didn't feel like they cut it off too early. It would just kind of be like, okay, cool. So this was just a story about Thanos getting the Infinity Stones. We got some really, really cool characters. We close the book, and then we move on to the next thing. The end of Avengers Endgame just felt too final. And so I think that if you did have all these characters thrown in there, and we did get Doctor Doom and Avengers Secret Wars, and we got every character that we ever wanted to see, it would give us that exact same feeling. And I think that would actually kill interest in the MCU, more so than some of the stuff that Marvel's already done. So, yeah, I'm not upset about Doctor Doom not being in it.
That's a really good point. Give it some longevity, stretch it out. Because I did feel that way watching Endgame. I was like, oh, well, cool. What's next? This is over. We close that book. But speaking of that, actually, you mentioned, Disney bought up all the rights to everything. X-Men in the MCU.
Yes, God, I'm so excited for it.
Who would be, I know you're a huge X-Men fan, who would be like the one X-Men that you want to see in the MCU, bar everybody else? Who's that one person, and who do they cast? Who plays that role?
Ooh. Let me look up his name. I know the face because it's funny that you asked this. I was thinking about this last night. I was watching The Wire, or not The Wire. I was watching Oz. I got to look this dude up. Cyril Riley Oz. Cyril O'Reilly. Scott William Winters. Okay. I'd want to see him as William Stryker.
Okay. Yeah, I had to look him up too, so I could put the face to it. See who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he would make a great William Stryker. Honestly, I want to see the Purifiers in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? That's what I want to see. Like, I want to see the Purifiers in the MCU. They wouldn't do it. They would never give us the Purifiers in the MCU. And they would never give us William Stryker from the comics in the MCU. Disney would shut that down in an instant. They would be like, nope, we're not having some religious fanatic kill kids in a comic. They're in a movie. Like, that's not going to happen. Did you guys ever read God Loves Man Kills?
No, I didn't.
Bro, okay. For people listening to this podcast, if you have kiddies in the room, I would shoo them out This is not for them. But literally, the story opens up with like these kids that can't be any more than 7 or 8, like fleeing for their lives, right? Just like running for their lives. And they keep talking about how like quote unquote they killed our parents and so on and so forth. But they're obviously terrified. They're crying, that kind of thing. These folks eventually catch up to the kids in like a playground. And the kids are like begging for their life, and they're like, "Why do you want to kill us?" And these folks respond, "Because you don't deserve to live." They execute them on the spot, and then they string them up on the playground, and they put a sign that says "Muty" around their chest. And you end up finding out that like that's the Purifiers, and they're led by William Stryker, who's this religious fanatic who thinks it's his mission from God to kill mutants. And that's what he does. Like he does not care how old they are. He doesn't care if they're kids, infants, adults, the elderly. It doesn't matter. If they're a mutant, they have to die. I mean, literally, there was a point in the mid 2000s when they brought William Stryker back, and he blew up a busload of kids. No lie. I mean, it's just it's stuff like that. You know, the guy. It's an exceedingly dark story, but it's phenomenally written and handled by Chris Claremont. And to this day, it's still my favorite X-Men story ever written. I absolutely love it. But we're never going to get that in the end. Could you imagine a Disney-sanctioned movie where a religious fanatic blows up a busload of kids or executes kids on a playground and strings them up in what's obviously an allegory to lynching from the South? That's never going to happen. That's never, ever, ever going to happen. Like that Disney, Marvel, those guys would be vilified if that ever happened, right? They would tear them apart.
I can already see the hashtag cancel Feige.
Oh yeah, cancel Feige, cancel Disney. Like it would be too much. It would be too much. You would kind of you'd have to ease people into it. And that's my concern when it comes to the X-Men, is that my biggest fear is that what they're going to end up doing, they're going to end up taking away a lot of the super significant stories. Okay, so here's a really good example of this. There is I can't remember the exact issue of the story, but you have Uncanny X-Men issue number 200, right? That is the trial of Magneto. That's where Magneto hands himself over to the World Court and says, like, I am willing to allow myself to be put on trial for all my terrorist actions, right? As a mutant terrorist, like I'm allowing myself to be put on trial. That happened because there was a story where he ended up attacking Kitty Pryde, who's Jewish, and Magneto himself is Jewish, or really, I guess Romani, but I don't know if Jewish and Romani are synonymous. I'm some uncultured barbarian. I don't know exactly how that works. Brother. Yeah, but regardless, the situation, Magneto basically stopped himself and caught himself, and then realized that given his past actions and the fact that he indiscriminately would wipe out human beings, giving no thought to whether they were men, women, children, the elderly, or whatever, that he had basically become the very Nazis that he stood against. Right, that he hated. He had become the thing he hated the most. And that was his motivation for turning himself over to the World Court. But moments like that are significant because of Magneto's own history. Now, there's ways to rework that. Magneto does not have to be a Jew from World War II, especially in the MCU, where the characters are more focused on aging in real time. Right? I always tell people the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a combination of the Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics, the main Marvel Universe from Marvel Comics, and Earth 98, a really obscure alternate reality where the characters aged in real time, right? So the Fantastic Four aged up, they retired, new people took their places, and the cycle repeated itself. There are a few exceptions like Thor because of his godhood, the Incredible Hulk because of his healing factor, and so on. But yeah, like, you know, it's giving Magneto a backstory that is still rooted in torment and suffering and seeing the worst of humanity. That's not overly difficult to do. But I think that more the idea of what he was willing to do and the depravity of his backstory and seeing humanity at their absolute worst, that I think is what Disney would kind of shy away from. That's what I think that they would sort of move away from. And I think that needs to be something that is heavily addressed, because the entire core basis behind the X-Men is that they are, whether Stan Lee in 2018 did an interview with the Rolling Stone where he said he didn't really intend for it to be that way. But whether he intended for it to be that way or not, the X-Men are an allegory for any and all marginalized groups that have ever existed in any society in the history of humanity. And so I think that being able to lean into that is important. And I think that showing instances where you had Professor Xavier, what was it? It was Fatal Attractions, when the X-Men tried to stop Magneto from some crazy campaign. Magneto lost his mind, pulled the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. And so Magneto shuts his mind down, right? And it's just like, nope, done. Like literally uses telepathy, shuts his mind down. Magneto's consciousness enters into Xavier's head, and it just kind of festers there. And then some mutant is killed on the grounds of like really, really close to the Xavier Institute by a fanatical group of humans. And so Xavier's frustration mingles with Magneto's hatred, and you get Onslaught. Whether or not we would actually see Onslaught in the MCU, I don't know. But what is important is that the feelings of despair and frustration that Xavier had with humanity, the feelings of anger that Magneto had towards humanity over the fact that the group simply just either attacked mutants outright or refused a peaceful coexistence with humans and mutants, those things are tangible and those things are important. Stories like God Loves, Man Kills that draw a parallel between racism in the United States and marginalization of groups in the United States or even across the world and the mutant population, those things have to be viewed. And I my biggest fear is that Disney is going to try to avoid the political discussion and end up releasing a subpar X-Men title. Because the X-Men are nothing but political. And I think leaning into that would be a phenomenal thing. Again, I don't want to turn this into a great big huge political podcast, but still, it's just the nature of the X-Men is such that there are stories there that in order to tell them effectively, Disney's going to have to be willing to do things that they just would normally not be willing to do in order to tell those stories effectively. And that's kind of what I'm concerned about, is that Disney will just refuse to. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe Deadpool, maybe them doing Deadpool kind of opens that door a little bit for them to increase the violence just a tad bit. Maybe.
I hope so. I mean, here's my question for you guys, because you guys have been asking me all these questions. So here's my question for you guys. Deadpool being rated R, right? The rumors out there is that the Deadpool 3 movie, at least part of it, is going to be Deadpool killing the Fox universe, which is why Wolverine comes back. Right. So what are your all's thoughts on the idea of what's basically Cullen Bunn's Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe, except he's killing everybody in the Fox universe?
I love it. That seems like
Yeah.
Deadpool, to a T, man. That's like the definition of Deadpool. I love it.
I don't know if any end credit scene was as satisfying as Deadpool 2 when he starts just going through and when it shows Ryan Reynolds reading the script for Green Lantern and he just blasts him in the head, or when he's like, finally, oh, is that Wade? Oh, I guess they finally found a way to shut you up, and then blap, and then he's like, hey, just cleaning up some continuity stuff, like, I'm out of here. It was one of the greatest end credit scenes of anything that I've ever seen. Forget about comics. It was the most satisfying thing that I've seen in the last, I don't know how many years. So I'm good with it, and it's, I don't know. There's stuff that I love, and I talk about this all the time too. When we talk about Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, because I honestly wasn't a fan of Multiverse of Madness at all. Really, I didn't like it. Yeah,
LJ, come on now, man. You were not a fan of Doctor Strange 2?
My issue with Doctor Strange 2 had more to do with Sam Raimi than anything else. And I get a lot of hate for it, but I don't feel like Sam Raimi's style and the way that he interprets comics to screen has evolved that much since Spider-Man 3. Guy's been making comic book movies since Darkman. Darkman was the first thing that I ever saw when I was a little kid, and I loved it. Yeah. That gets a pass because of the era that it's from. Anything that's made in that era gets a pass for its level of cheesiness or corniness, right?
That gets a pass because I like it.
Yeah. I still love Darkman. I think it's great. Love Liam Neeson. But then we go into the Spider-Man, 1, 2, and 3. Those also get somewhat of a pass because of the era that they were in. I just feel like in 2022 we're in a different era, and I don't feel like he's matured or progressed. He's got more access to visual effects, maybe more access to a budget because of where Marvel's at now, because of his notoriety and his love from that crowd. But I just don't feel like his style. I feel like he's still making early 2000s comic book superhero movies. And so there's just a level of corniness with Sam Raimi that I just can't seem to get past.
That's fair.
I love the Spider-Man trilogy because I grew up with it, but sometimes I feel like we look at that first trilogy through rose-colored glasses because of our nostalgic connection to it and where we were at that point in our life. When you look back at it objectively, it leans pretty heavily on the corny side.
Oh, it really is corny, but like and this is going to be a controversial statement to make. I think by and large, comic book movies back then were better. They were more enjoyable. Now, I think that probably there was Iron Man and a few others, but I think once we hit Captain America and the Winter Soldier, I think that's actually when we made a turning point. As much as I love Captain America and the Winter Soldier, and it's still my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe movie to date, I think that was actually a bad turning point, because I think, as great as that movie was, that's when Marvel stopped treating comic book movies as just these really fun projects, and they started treating them as like these really serious films. And so since Captain America and the Winter Soldier, outside of like maybe Guardians of the Galaxy or like a couple others here and there, they've all just gotten progressively darker going into Avengers Endgame. Now, a lot of that makes sense given the nature of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. It'd be a little weird to watch a movie where Thanos is blinking out half the life in the universe and like Rocket's cracking jokes, like, yeah, man, it's dusted, like these guys are like cigar ash now, or something along those lines. I mean, it'd be a little weird.
I'm getting
like,
that arm.
Yeah, exactly. I'm getting Thanos' arm. I mean, I think the pacing would be terrible, and the mood of the film would destroy the reality of the situation that they were in, which is the bad guy basically won. I think that the movies kind of had to get darker, but when I look back at movies like the Fantastic Four and Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, and I look at the first X-Men, which was not very good, and the second X-Men, which was not very good either, and I look at Spider-Man 1 and 2, which were great, and Spider-Man 3, which was not good. When I go back and look at those movies, they're popcorn films, right? There are movies that you go on and have fun on a Friday night. As opposed to this day and age, which is very, very serious comic book films that are more dark than anything else. Like a really good example is Black Panther 2. Given the context of the situation regarding Black Panther 2, I can understand why they made it dark, because the movie was as much the staff, or I guess the cast and crew, mourning the passing of Chadwick Boseman, as it was the film reflecting the fact that Chadwick Boseman had passed and the chaotic state that Wakanda was in after T'Challa had basically died. Admittedly, they had to kind of rewrite the film in a rush because Chadwick Boseman had passed away. And I know that sort of irritated a lot of people, but at the same time, I look at Ryan Coogler and I look at the cast and I'm like, okay, but I doubt these guys went to the drawing board and said, all right, Chadwick, all right, Kevin Feige, we wrote up 2 scripts for Black Panther, one in case Chadwick Boseman dies and the other in case he lives. Nobody really thinks like that. Right? I mean, a sociopath or a psychopath might think like that, but a rational human being would look at that and say, we care about this guy. He was as much a member of our family as he was his own. We hope that he recovers. And so we're going to assume that he does and move forward accordingly. Having said that, the rough drafts, or the idea that was kicked around for the original script, is that the second Black Panther movie was going to be T'Challa teaching his son to be a superhero. And they were going to like travel around, and they were, and they were going to explore and all that kind of stuff, which would have been just a beautiful and amazing film. It would have just been absolutely mind blowing. We probably would have met Aurora somewhere along the line. So you basically would have found out that T'Challa and Storm had a fling when they were younger, which happened in the comics, right? They met when they were teenagers. So I think that the second film would have been gorgeous. But I think that, given the context of the situation, it's understandable of why Black Panther 2 was a dark film. Doctor Strange 2 didn't feel that dissimilar from everything else in the MCU up to that point. It felt like every Marvel movie ever. Even though Sam Raimi had his own horror element, you could tell he was on a tight leash of what he could do. I think that coming out of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, I think the feeling of the Marvel Cinematic Universe being incredibly formulaic was felt immensely. She-Hulk is one of the few projects that felt separate from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. If anything, I got bored watching She-Hulk, but it's also because I'm not a woman. And a lot of the jokes that were being created on that show weren't designed for me, right? Like, I don't use dating apps, right? And so I'm not a woman on dating apps who's just like, I've only had 6 people who have shown an interest in me, when the reality is she probably got thousands and thousands of hits. She just only saw 6 because those are the only ones that she found attractive, right? Everybody else was invisible, and so it's a lot of those jokes and a lot of those points never really, they never really impacted me in any meaningful way. But I know Mariah loved a lot of the scenes from She-Hulk, and she loved the moment when you had She-Hulk twerking with Megan Thee Stallion, and so I think how they handled Scar was kind of ridiculous. You're right.
Yeah.
You get to the end of the show and the Incredible Hulk's like, here's my son Scar. Like, I know he's a real huge badass in the comics, and I know he's like this grizzled beast who looks like he would just tear people apart, different things like that. But here in the MCU, he looks like he drinks vegetable powder mixed with coconut water and meditates first thing in the morning and probably wears Airwalks, or like
Yeah.
Birkenstock sandals. Like he's that guy, right? He's less grr and more purr. Like that's no. Like Scar's supposed to be the guy where you see him and you're just like, holy shit. Like I really hope he doesn't come for me. Like he needs to be that guy, not what looks like a hippie, like
You didn't like his haircut?
no, he looked like a goof. Right? It just he just looked he looked like a buffoon. Like you couldn't take him seriously,
Yeah.
And so it's yeah.
It's funny that you said like the She-Hulk, because I personally got bored with it too. I know LJ did. We've talked about that before.
I just hated it. I hated the entire show.
Out of all the Disney Plus series, my wife isn't really into comics or even Marvel. Really, I drag her along with me. She-Hulk was the only one where she's like, "Oh, are we watching it tonight? Are we gonna watch that one?"
Yeah. It was a show for women.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
Yeah.
interesting you said that because it definitely rang true on my end as well.
See, I got lucky though because my girlfriend couldn't care less about, and she honestly thought that the whole MCU and all that when we first started dating 3+ years ago, she thought that when I took her to see a Marvel movie that it was going to be like an anime or something. She really had no idea, and she's not a big movie buff in the first place. I can't tell you how many classic movies we watch for the first time regularly. Like I just watched Pulp Fiction with her for the first time the other night.
Oh.
What?
So,
She's
yeah,
never
yeah.
seen it before?
And
Dude.
it was like a week or two before that we watched Reservoir Dogs. And she'd never
Oh
seen that either. You know what I mean? Like
God.
some of my favorite movies. I watched Titanic with her for the first time. You know what I mean? Like love her to death, but you name a classic movie and she'll look at you and go, "Yeah, I don't know what that is." She's never really cared. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Has she ever seen Goodfellas or like A Bronx Tale?
Well, so she's got me for a boyfriend now, so she's starting to see all these. She's seen Goodfellas now, and some of my favorite movies are always the gangster movies.
Yes.
The
Yes.
Town. The Town.
Dude, The Town is amazing.
Jeremy Renner.
Yes.
We watched, and because of KB, we watched The Harder They Fall, and Lakeith Stanfield and John Majors, the whole cast, Idris Elba, they're all so good.
That's the all-black cast it's like the blaxploitation western. Yeah, that movie was amazing. Yeah, The Harder They Fall.
So good. And that's, I mean, we talked about it a couple episodes ago, but it was like, if I could have one actor right now that I would love, and I don't care, put him in any role just about. Lakeith Stanfield is becoming one of my favorite people. Everything that dude does, I just love it. I love it. And his role in that movie, the best part was when, spoiler alert, but there should be a statute of limitations on spoiler alerts, by the way. If the movie's been out for a year and you haven't seen it, that's on you.
I say I give it like 2 weeks.
Yeah. And it's on Netflix. It's not hard to access, but when he pops that dude, but he's starting to get that kind of I'm dying, sad, pathetic sort of wilting look. And Lakeith Stanfield goes, "Oh, no, don't do that, brother. Die like a man. You choose how you go out." Oh, so cold. So cold.
Yeah.
Oh, so good.
Gave me goosebumps thinking of that again.
Oh, no.
Yeah, Lakeith Stanfield, he is. There's it wasn't Blue Marvel, but there was a character in the MCU that I wanted to see him play, and I can't remember the name of it. But my thought was like people were asking about that, and I was like Lakeith Stanfield. He's the guy that needs to play that character. And I couldn't think who it was. Again, it's not Blue Marvel. It was another black character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But nonetheless, yeah. So yeah, man, dude, that amazes me. Okay, so has she seen all right, so she never saw so she hasn't seen Reservoir Dogs at all?
So we watched it the other day. I honestly, we got so hyped on that other stuff, I don't even remember where I was going with that. But
yeah, let's just talk about Tarantino films. Let's just talk about Quentin Tarantino movies.
Yeah.
I'm totally down with that.
Yeah. We're done. Hey, for all you listeners, we're done. We don't even. No, so that is where I was going with it really quick. Was that she has become a Marvel fan because my kids and I, my girlfriend, we live in San Diego. We've got Regal theaters here. We do the movie passes where you pay, you get to go as many movies as you want to in the month. So we never miss any of the Marvel, any of the DC stuff, even if it's just her and I. We don't miss anything. So she's gotten very familiar with everything as it's gone on. But unfortunately for her, I feel like most of what she's been exposed to in the last couple of years has been Phase 4. It wouldn't have been the phase that I would have really wanted her to be oversaturated on, personally. But when we started watching She-Hulk, it was one of the very few times that she's looked at me like, "Are you kidding? You know, like, what is this?" And we got a couple episodes in, and she just wouldn't watch it with me anymore. She was just like, "It's just cheesy, dude. I can't. Like, I don't know what this is. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this." She liked most of the stuff. She hated Venom too, but I think most people did. That's fair.
It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great.
Yeah, it was not good.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge Tom Hardy fan. I love Woody Harrelson, but it just Venom was at a rave. He was wearing glow sticks. I can't do the corny stuff. Kills me.
Yeah, but see, that's the thing though. Is Venom is more in line, like the first Venom film and the second Venom film, that's more in line with the old movies. And it's one of the reasons why people say that Sony has never moved past Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy.
Right.
They've never moved past, because like Michael Morbius was like the old Marvel movies.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just like those corny movies. But like I said, I think that when you have those movies and you juxtapose them with the release of the Marvel films, sure, they're going to feel subpar. But I think that history will be kind, not really to Morbius, that movie was ass, but I think history will be kind to Venom 1 and Venom 2, probably She-Hulk, right, things like that, because I think that people will look back and they'll see it as kind of the best of both worlds, right? That the Sony movies were like a return to the old early 2000s comic book films, and Marvel is the more modern take. But honestly, I enjoyed the first Venom movie, and I enjoyed the second Venom movie. No one enjoyed the Morbius movie. And so it was like, I think history will have a more positive view of a lot of the projects that are coming out now.
Okay, so we're getting close to our time here. We're not going to keep you all day, but we have a good friend, JayAxe, who has another podcast. He was supposed to actually be our first guest, and then that didn't work out. I had some family stuff that was unavoidable. So apologies to JayAxe, but I wanted to allow him, because what we were going to do during that interview was ask him a couple questions to ask you, because he's also a big fan. And what he does for the Marvel Contest of Champions, our mobile gaming community, he does much of the same kind of content that you do, where he focuses on the lore. So there's a lot of people that make content for that game. He's really the only one that breaks down the lore of all the characters and does all the deep dive stuff like that. So what he wanted to know, he's got 3 questions for you. What story or character do you want adapted for the MCU? Yeah, I guess we can start there, but...
What story or character do I want adapted to the MCU? Well, because we won't get God Loves, Man Kills. What story or character do I want adapted? I want Paul Jenkins and Jay Lee's The Sentry, or Kevin Grievous's Adam, the Legend of Blue Marvel. Either one of those 2% two would be great.
Yeah, me too. What DC project are you most excited for?
Honestly, man, I was actually talking to Benny at Comic Story at breakfast this morning. He and I we went to this restaurant here in town. We meet up like every Saturday, to get breakfast. And we were talking about that. And it was like, there's some that have my interest, like Lanterns seems cool. Amanda Waller looks really cool. But there really isn't anything from the James Gunn lineup that's just got me like, wow. Like, I'm super excited about this. Honestly, I think in a lot of ways, this was James Gunn borrowing a page out of Kevin Feige, right? Like, the MCU started with, like, Captain America and Iron Man and, like, these characters that were more or less obscure to the non-comic book reader, right? I mean, like I said, there was, like, when Marvel was doing the marketing for the first Iron Man film, they literally had to they had to market the character so that people knew that Iron Man was not a robot, because people thought he was a robot. I thought he was a machine. And so they literally had to convince people that was not the case. You know, people are aware of who Captain America is. Like they're aware that he's a thing that exists, but people don't know the story of Captain America, right? So, you know, they're pretty obscure. And I would go as far as to say that Amanda Waller's had enough exposure. People have a good idea about her, but the Green Lantern mythos, as popular as it is for the comic book reader, Green Lanterns are probably one of the most, probably in the top 3 most popular groups or characters or what have you that exist in DC Comics, all because of Jeff Johns' legendary Green Lantern run and like the Sinestro Corps War and all that. But the average person does not know anything about them, right? They don't know how the Green Lantern power works. They don't know about the emotional spectrum. They don't know the difference between Green Lanterns and Yellow Lanterns and Red Lanterns and Indigo and Star Sapphires. They don't know anything about those, right? The Sinestro Corps being based on fear and the Indigos being just really nomadic and the Star Sapphires based on love. They don't know any of that stuff. And so I think that what James Gunn is doing is taking a page out of what Marvel did, which is grabbing really obscure characters and making them interesting, which I'm not against, right? I mean, at the end of the day, and I think James Gunn is smart enough to know that at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is word of mouth, right? Like people didn't know who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. And the only reason the Guardians of the Galaxy succeeded the way they did is because they were a Marvel property. They were a Marvel Cinematic Universe film. And so people were going to go see it because it was the right kind of movie at the right time. I think that while the DC Cinematic Universe is not on the same level as the MCU, I think there is enough interest about, with what James Gunn's going to do. There's enough interest with what these new movies are going to look like that people will go see it. And by way of word of mouth, I think instead of what Marvel would get, which is $1 billion over the course of like the first month of the movie, I think that the DC Cinematic Universe films won't necessarily reach that level of success in the same way. But I think that you'll see a marginal, kind of a little like a mini peak when the movie comes out, right? People going to see it, and then I think you'll see a gradual incline in popularity of that film as word of mouth gets around, and people are like, actually, Lanterns is really good. Or Amanda Waller's really, really good, or like The Authority is phenomenal, right? People will talk about how good those projects are, and that will lead to more people becoming a part of it. So I think it's a smarter move by James Gunn to grab more obscure characters that can bring something unique to the table. It can kind of be a break away from like, all right, guys, so like we're rebooting the DCEU. Here's another Batman movie and another Superman movie and another Wonder Woman, and like, because people are tired of that. I think that James Gunn has a good enough finger on the pulse of the audience to know that just because a lot of people say they want a new Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman movie doesn't mean they want it right now, right? They just want one at some point, and he'll give them that. But I think it'll be a while before we do. So. Yeah, I guess. What was the? I kind of lost track. What was the original question?
Just which project are you most excited for?
Which project am I most excited for? I'm probably more excited for Amanda Waller out of all of them. But again, like there really isn't anything about the DC announcements that overly excite me and get me hyped. But I will go see them when they come out. So we'll see if my opinion changes when the projects are released.
One thing that Gunn said in that slate release that got me excited. I mean, The Authority sounds really, really cool, so I'm stoked about that. But when he said the Green Lanterns, he had this little comment. He said, kind of like a True Detective, and True Detective was so good that it's kind of a weird, obscure way to bring that in. But I'm interested. I'm sold on this idea that you're pitching loosely in 5 seconds, but.
Mm-hmm. Just the True Detective reference, I mean, to me, puts off the idea that instead of the Green Lantern feeling like a traditional comic book film, which is like flights of fantasy and kind of crazy and zany and some wild stuff, that it's going to feel more grounded and it's going to feel more real world, right? Like here is a story about some detectives or the Green Lantern Corps, which is more akin to like a military, right? Or like a police force, if you want to call it that just happens to feel like some guys who are doing some, or it's going to focus on some guys doing some detective work type stuff or military stuff or whatever that just happen to have powers. I think that's what he's talking about, is it's going to feel more gritty, more character driven as opposed to power driven, which is a smart decision.
Yeah, it sounds cool as hell.
Yeah.
The last question from JayAxe was, so in that game that we played, the MCOC, who would you want added to the game?
Well, one, I don't know who all's in there right now. I assume Maestro's in there. Maestro Hulk?
Sort of.
Kind of. We got a variant.
Okay, so Maestro Hulk was in the comic. Yeah, Maestro Hulk was the one because it was honestly the Contest of Champions comic that Marvel released. I don't know, man. It was like Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America, right? It was the best comic book that nobody was reading. It was a great story. It was fun, right? It took place on like the remnants of Battle World and that kind of thing. You saw like the return of the Sentry in some capacity and so on. But yeah, I don't know who all's in there. If Blue Marvel's not in there, I'd want to see Blue Marvel. I'm always a fan of Adam Brashear. So, yeah.
He was in a wild card vote not that long ago, and he was the one I was voting for.
Really? Who did he lose to?
Bullseye. Yeah.
Huh.
He was
Interesting.
that was the wild card winner, I believe, was Bullseye.
That'll be changed. The rumor is that Adam Brashear is supposed to be on the Marvels, and the other rumor is that the Marvels is supposed to get a trailer during the Super Bowl. So,
Right.
Nice.
Yeah, I heard that.
yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'll be watching either way.
Yeah.
Okay, with the last few minutes we have here, thought we could do a little speed round. Favorite Marvel movie. Period.
Captain America and the Winter Soldier.
Feel that. Favorite DC movie of all time. Doesn't DCEU.
The Joker.
Solid choice. Worst
Yeah.
Marvel movie of all time.
Actually, no. I take that back with DC. Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Mm.
Yeah, that's the greatest DC movie ever made.
Worst Marvel movie.
Ooh. Howard the Duck, hands down. Yeah. Yeah.
Worst DC movie.
Green Lantern.
I feel that too. Okay, Star Wars shows, DC shows, The Boys, Invincible, MCU shows, Umbrella Academy. One has to be deleted forever from the history books. What's your pick?
Ooh. One has to be deleted forever. Umbrella Academy.
Oh,
Yeah. Umbrella Academy is good. Don't get me wrong. And I don't make that choice lightly, right? Umbrella Academy is really good. It's really unique and it's really fun. But the DC shows, we're talking about Batman, the animated series, Superman, the animated series,
yeah.
Justice League Unlimited, right? I can't bring
Yeah.
myself to get rid of those. And the Marvel TV shows, I mean, I thought they were okay. Like, none of them I really cared about except for X-Men, the animated series, and kind of Spider-Man, which I enjoyed a little bit. The Silver Surfer series only ran for one season, but that show was amazing. And then I love Invincible. The Boys is probably the best comic book show going right now.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Umbrella Academy gets the axe.
Okay, you're putting a team of villains together. Who's your cherry pick list of 5 that you're going to run the universe with for villains? And DC, Marvel, Star Wars, doesn't matter who you throw together.
Ooh, and I can bring them all together.
Mm-hmm.
Exar Kun from the Star Wars universe. He was ridiculously overpowered. Probably one of the most powerful Sith Lords to ever live. He wasn't as strong as like Darth Vitiate. Darth Vitiate was like, he was so strong with the Force he could alter reality. But Exar Kun was just really cool. Like I think he's more interesting than Revan was. So I would say Exar Kun. I would say with villains, New Sun, which was Gambit from an alternate universe that was able to like detonate matter on a universal scale, so he could like detonate stars and stuff. Like it was crazy. He was just Gambit's powers in the most extreme. So yeah, Exar Kun, New Sun, Null the Symbiote God, Sinestro, and damn, who would I pick for the final guy? Homelander.
Yes.
Such a
Yeah.
fun choice.
I was over here thinking, I'm like, we got to throw Homelander in there, bro. So I'm glad you ended on Homelander.
Yeah, Homelander would be legit. That is the most eclectic team ever.
Yeah.
Null and Homelander. Jeez.
Yeah, Null and Homelander. Yeah, you want to talk about button heads, man.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Okay, so basically the same question, but top 5 for heroes. Any universe combined.
Definitely Adam Brashear, the Blue Marvel. I'd leave out pretty much any of the Star Wars characters. They're okay, but none of them really stand out to me. Actually, you know what? I think it was I'll take. It was either Ulick or K-Kel Droma, whichever one fell to the dark side first, or whichever one fell to the dark side and then went back to the light side. Which I want to say is K Keldroma, and then Magneto, definitely. Saint Walker, the Blue Lanterns, and I think I'm on 4. The last one I would pick would be, God, is a superhero? Well, there are no superheroes in The Boys. Right, they're all just anti-heroes and villains. Maybe Mark from Invincible, but I feel like that's the easy choice. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah. KB looks disappointed down there. Who were you hoping I would pick?
I actually didn't have one for the heroes. I just when we started talking about villains, I was like, man, I hope Homelander squeezes in there somewhere. So
I mean, I like villains more than to give you perspective. When Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic originally came out, the first thing I did was play through on the dark side. Right? Like I was a dick in KOTOR 1. Like I was just a terrible human being. And I did the exact same thing in KOTOR 2. Like my dad was like, "Why do you want to do stuff like that?" And it's like, "Because I can," you know, and it's just like it's cool. No, so I definitely love, like, I tell my fans all the time, like, okay, so I made this YouTube short where I talked about how Thanos was an idiot, right? In the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I was like, Thanos was an idiot, guys. Like, if I were Thanos and I had the Infinity Gauntlet, yeah, the first thing I'd do is I'd snap my fingers and I would dust half the life in the universe. And then I would wipe the minds of everybody there that it had even happened in the first place. So nobody would know why half the universe's population was gone. And then what I would do is I would alter reality. So the only time that a newborn baby was born is when someone died. So it would keep the universe at 50% forever. And then I would just go live on a farm. And like, that would be it. And it would just be like, cool, like I'm done now, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, if they had written the plot of Infinity War correctly, there would have been no Avengers Endgame, which of course then they would have lost out on like $3 billion, whatever it was. But still, you know, I'm just saying, like, no, I like villains. Like I'm 100% a villain. Like if I got powers, no, the world would be totally screwed. I would be Brightburn. Like I'd just go on a villainous rampage. Yeah. Brightburn is okay. You know what? I will replace XR Kun with Brightburn. I think that's a good choice.
that's fair.
Yeah. We'll have like two Homelanders, basically.
So the last 2 questions, just because anybody that we associate with is going to know who you are, but maybe we have some friends, some family that are just learning about Rob for the first time. What I think that some of my favorite questions I save for last: what comic run should everyone read?
Oh, damn. All right, give me a minute, man. I've never been asked that question before. Wow. What comic book run should everybody read? See, normally I would say Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, but the downside of that is he just kind of jumps in the middle of the Marvel Universe, so you have to know who all those people are. Otherwise, it's lost on you and people will end up giving it up. The same thing with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four. What comic book run should everybody read? I would say Dan Slott's Spider-Man run. Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man was great. It starts with Spider-Man Big Time, and then runs all the way up to, oh God, was it the Clone Conspiracy? I think it was. But yeah, Dan Slott's Amazing Spider-Man run. That is a comic book run that everybody should read at least once.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What, and this is a very fitting one to end this interview on. Rob, what Comics Explained video would you recommend as a first watch to a new viewer?
Probably House of M Decimation. Yeah. When the Scarlet Witch takes away 98% of the mutant population's powers. It's a phenomenally written story, and I explain enough in that story to where people can go into it knowing nothing about Marvel and completely understand everything that's going on. So they won't really be lost, right? You don't have to be a Marvel reader to understand that story. But the story itself is incredibly well written. It's phenomenal. It changes. So if people want to get into the X-Men now, it changes the entire landscape of the X-Men. And actually, you just read from House of M going forward. But House of M and Decimation, that's the video that I would say people should watch. It's great. It's a great video that I made.
I also want to give you credit to any of our listeners. If you guys have not seen Rob's breakdown of Secret Wars or King in Black, King in Black was one of my favorite breakdowns that you ever did. That's one of my personal favorites.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Rob,
dude.
I did want to ask you one more question, and it's a total curveball to the listeners. Although you and I were talking about it a little bit before the show, but what brought you into photography?
What brought me into photography? I kind of picked it up as a hobby, and a friend of mine, Heather, she actually runs an Instagram account called The End Photography. Although I don't think she's putting. I haven't checked in a while. She may have put stuff on there again. But she's a world class photographer. She's been flown to like France and places like that for photo shoots. But she sat me down and she taught me so much about photography that I will always love her for that. She taught me so much about photography. She's a phenomenal friend. And then from there, I just kind of built the foundation, or just kind of built on that foundation and just went forward. So honestly, it just started off as something that I was curious about, and then just kind of became something that I wanted to turn into a hobby. Didn't really want to turn into a side hustle, right? Not every hobby needs to be a side hustle, but I just wanted to turn into a hobby and just something that I have fun with. So, yeah.
That's awesome. That one's a little close to me because my grandmother was a photographer. And so, the
cool.
mindsets behind photographers and why do they choose the scenes that they choose to shoot, or just photography in general fascinates me. And the way, to me, it's almost like therapeutic. But, following you on Twitter and looking at your photography, which is fantastic, I was just curious, what's going on in Rob's mind with photography?
Yeah, man. Just a hobby that I enjoy doing. It's my meditation, right? Just kind of drive to Denver and then do some street photography and just kind of roam around and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Rob, we take ourselves out. We take ourselves out of our own podcast. I feel like it would be a huge missed opportunity and a ball drop if we don't have Rob from Comics Explained take us out on this outro.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, guys. So I guess thanks for listening. This has been Rob and Eljay and KB, and we have been rambling about comics for the last little while, answering questions and talking and chit-chatting and whatnot. It's been a great time. We've laughed, we've cried, and so we're going to go ahead and bring this podcast episode to an end. Thank you all for listening, and we will catch you all later. Peace.
Young Apollo with the Debrief.